Roy gave me my break writing in comics with a Conan story, and then I was able to go full circle and hire Roy to come and write on the Conan animation series.
If you could go back and have full creative control over Conan the Adventurer, what would you change about it?
There is something I want to clear up for the record.
Hello, my fellow Sumerians. Today on the show, we have Christy Marx. Now, if that name sounds familiar, you may have grown up on 80s and 90s animation. I'm talking G.I. Joe. I'm talking Gem and the Holograms, Ninja Turtles, and Conan the Adventurer.
Conan the Adventurer. Conan, warrior without fear. Conan.
So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and without further ado, Christy Marx. Christy, I am such a big fan of yours. You've worked on legendary animated series. Everything from Spider-Man to Gem and the Holograms, Ninja Turtles, and Conan the Adventurer. You also got your start by selling a story idea to Roy Thomas for Savage Sword of Conan, and that story is called Child of Sorcery. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that story came about?
I had moved to LA not intending to actually be a writer or get into the entertainment business or anything of that sort, but I was a enormous comics fan. I've been reading comics my entire life and was absolutely obsessed with comics. In fact, I discovered Conan for the first time through the Marvel Comics version of Conan and that amazing art by Barry Windsor Smith, which I just became a huge fan of his art because it's just so astounding. But after I'd lived in LA for a few years, I discovered that I wasn't an artist. You see, I thought I had to draw comics in order to do comics because I grew up not knowing any better. I grew up in a Midwestern town, and I was a total freak as a girl reading comics as a kid, and in fact, reading comics at all. But I thought that I had to draw them, and so I had this mistaken notion that I needed to be an artist. Well, someone thankfully disabused me of the notion of me doing art, and I thought, okay, well then I guess I'm supposed to be a writer. I guess that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I finally started getting serious about writing, and Roy Thomas then moved to L.A., and this was a big move for him. And I think he was one of the first people from the New York group, to come and do that. And he spoke at a fan meeting one night. So I went to the fan meeting, and I sat up front, and I listened to people ask him all of the really typical kind of questions that they would all ask. I mean, all about past work and just typical nerdy comic book kind of questions. And nobody, to me, was asking him the question that I thought he probably most wanted to be asked. So I waited, and right towards the very end, I asked him, well, what are you working on now? And, what do you want to be doing in the future? What are your future goals? And so he loved that someone finally asked him that question, and that gave me a really great opportunity after the meeting to go up and talk to him and pitch to him the idea of writing something for him. And he said, well, I always thought it'd be kind of cool if we had a Conan story from the woman's point of view. I said, great. So I went home and I wrote a story. I wrote this short story, the Child of Sorcery story, and I wrote it like a short story. It was actually written full prose, dialogue and everything as a short story. So he bought it and he adapted it. He turned it into a comic book story, although it's still 99% all my writing. He had to make one change for some reason, what I had Conan fighting. Yeah, what I had Conan fighting when he had to get to the Wizard's Tower was the same as something Roy had already just done. So he made one little tweak there, but everything else was mine. So this was my first professional sale. And I just loved the idea that no one had done a story from the woman's point of view. The woman that encounters him, the woman that has sex with him, and then she gets pregnant, and it's like, they'd never really dealt with that in the comics. And so I thought here was a wonderful opportunity to actually touch upon.
Excuse my language, but Conan's kind of like the original boy. is probably tied with James Bond when it comes to the amount of illegitimate children that are roaming around.
Well, he's a lusty barbarian, let's face it.
So you sell this story to Roy Thomas. That begins your relationship with Marvel and comics. How does that lead to animation?
I was actually breaking into animation pretty much simultaneously to doing this story for Roy. And once he had that story and really liked it, and we got to be friends, he very kindly gave me more opportunities. I don't remember, the precise sequence necessarily, but he gave me the opportunity to do some Red Sonja stories, which I was really happy about because I love the Red Sonja character as well. And I don't remember the exact sequence, but he gave me as many opportunities as he could, which was really great of him because, it was a chance for me to break in and get some credits. And I was at the same time breaking into animation through Patty Freeling was doing the Fantastic Four series back there in the late 70s. And so I broke in there through interestingly enough, through comics because there was an organization that formed right about the same time as I was breaking in called the Comic Art Professional Society, CAPS. And they would meet once a month in LA, all these people from comics. And I got to know them. I joined and I got to know them. And one day Don Bluth said to me, there's this studio that's doing a Fantastic Four story and they're looking for people who know the Fantastic Four. And so I just cold walked in, got a meeting, and got a job writing an animation script because this was so early in the days of writing for animation that it was possible for something like that to actually happen. I mean, today that would just be impossible. But back then, nobody knew how to write an animation script. There was no established format. It was really new. The whole idea of writers working on animation scripts was so new. But I broke in writing Fantastic Four. So, and then I wrote, then I just kept doing development and writing work for that studio. DePatty became Marvel Productions. And I wrote Spider-Man and then Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And there was some other stuff that they had me do as well. I actually wrote a full X-Men script based on an outline from Stan Lee. But that series at that time never got sold.
That would have been an animated series?
Right.
That's super cool.
Yeah, they were trying to sell X-Men back then, but it didn't happen at the time.
Well, it eventually paid off. Circling back, what do you love most about Conan?
Well, the really cool thing about what Robert E. Howard did was he created a full world in the same way that Tolkien did with Middle Earth. I mean, he created a very big, complex, colorful, interesting world and took this wonderful, bigger-than-life character, gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirths. I mean, that really sums up the character so much. Bigger-than-life character. But I was really drawn into Conan at first through the comic book, as I said, and through Barry Windsor Smith's art, which I just thought was absolutely wonderful. And I love fantasy as well as science fiction. I particularly love the fantasy genre. So the whole different sort of sword and sorcery fantasy genre of it really appealed to me.
It must have been such a surreal moment for you to be a fan and then contribute to the legacy. What was that experience like?
Well, the really coolest moment for me was after this story had just come out. I was in a comic book store, my local comic book store, buying my usual batch of comics, and I'm standing there looking at my comics, and behind me I hear a guy come in and start talking to the owner of the store, and he's raving about the story. He's raving about the Conan story and how cool it was and what a great story it was. And I got to just turn around and go, I wrote that. I don't know whether they believed me or not, but it was just like this wonderful moment because it was completely unsolicited. It was a wonderful moment of validation.
So the only thing I don't like about your story is that there isn't a sequel. Did you ever have any ideas for one?
Oh, that would be wonderful. I would love to do a sequel based on that character. I think that would be just fantastic.
There's so much potential for stories about Conan's daughter. I mean, imagine just like a little Aquilonian teenager taking her out to prom, but having to talk to King Conan first. Like a little one-on-one, the most intimidating dad of all time.
Yeah, right. You look at my daughter wrong, I'd cut your head off.
It's super cool that you started your career with Conan because you also eventually helped develop the animated series.
So that came about in the way that so many other things that I worked on came about. I now spent years and years and years working on Hasbro properties. You know, Hasbro would develop a line of toys, like Gem was a line of dolls, and then I did Bucky O'Hare, which was also drawn from the comics, and they had a line of toys for that. And so they developed a line of action figures for Conan and invented all of these friends, of course, because you can't just have the one, you need to have more than one. So it began in the way that many of these things begin, in that Hasbro flew me out to the East Coast, to I forget whether it was the Rhode Island office or somewhere else, but one of those facilities they had out there, and they went over the toy line, here are all the various action figures and did the characters and so forth. And it was also done Sunbow Productions, because for years and years, of course, Sunbow Productions was the one producing all of the animation for all of these Hasbro properties, starting with G.I. Joe, that major development there, then Gem, and all kinds of properties. So Sunbow was also involved, going to be doing the animation part, and so I worked with Sunbow for many years now, of course, and it was kind of natural that they would pull me in to do something like this, because I was known for writing action stuff. I could do hard action stuff. And they knew me really well, and I'd already done development for them, so it was a fairly natural fit. And when I got there, I remember when it started with, I can't remember, I think it started with a phone call from from my friend at Sunbow Productions, Jay McCall, who I'd worked with. I think it was Jay that called me on it and said, well, they want to do a series based on Conan. I'm like, wait, you want to do an animation series based on Conan? I mean, you do know he's a big barbarian with a sword and he kills people, right? Like, yeah, I was like, okay, how is this going to work? And then they flew me out, showed me all the toys, and the fact that Conan was going to have all of these friends that were hanging around with him. And interestingly enough, they didn't have names for a couple of the products. So Snag was somebody I came up with. I came up with a name for that particular character, and I think one or two other characters. I certainly came up.
Wrathamon is basically a Thothamon. Personally, I love the name Wrathamon. It's perfect for a kid show. What inspired the name change?
Well, and there was also some legal reason why we couldn't use them. I think maybe because it was used in the movies or something. I'm trying to remember. There was some reason why I had to come up with a different name for our villain.
Did you create the Phoenix character?
Yeah, I created Phoenix. I have no memory of what inspired me to create Phoenix, but for some reason they're very fond in animation of cute little pet sidekicks. It was just kind of a thing. So anyway, invented him, and I also, and this is another funny story, I also came up with Dregs, of course, the little Naga character that's the sidekick to Wrathamon, kind of. And I originally named him Drek. Now, I had a friend back in the 70s who was from Chicago who's taught me some Yiddish. And so he taught me various Yiddish words. And Drek was one of the words that he taught me. And I didn't really think that much about it, but I thought I knew a little bit about what it meant, and I thought it made a funny sound for the character. So our production manager, Carol White's wonderful woman. I worked with her very extensively on all of the Sunbow series. She was a terrific lady, but she calls me up, and she's from New York. So she's New York Jewish instead of my friend's Chicago Jewish. So she calls me up and she goes, "You can't call this character Drek." I'm like, "Why not? Don't you know what that means?" And I'm thinking, okay, this obviously means something different to her than what I thought it meant. And so she was just like, "You can't use that. You can't use that name." So And so anyway, he got renamed to Dregs. I just thought it was something it meant something that was kind of dirty and disgusting, but I think probably to her it meant something way worse. So they presented me with this challenge. They wanted to do an animation series for kids and these action toys and so forth around a character that couldn't use his weapon. And this is always one of the biggest problems with an action series. I mean, when I wrote for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it was the same situation where they have all these, nunchucks and various weapons, but they can't use them directly on anything living. That's like an absolute no-no. And so I had to figure out some possible means for them to be able to use all of them, Conan with a sword and all the others with weapons. How could they use weapons without actually using them directly against anything living? And this was a real conundrum. This is something I had to figure out. Now, I started out by reading all of Robert E. Howard's original stories, and I stuck just to Howard. I didn't read anybody else. I stuck only to his stories, and went back and I read all of them. I probably had read some of them in the past, but I read all of them very carefully because I had to write a Bible, a series Bible, which would contain all of the information the writers would need, not just on the characters, but on all the worlds and cultures and all of this kind of background information that they would need. And in the process of reading one of the stories, they talked about this star metal. They talked about metal from a meteorite. And that was something that was an element in the story. And something clicked in my head. And I thought, okay, what if they all have special weapons and it's made out of this star metal? Like this is a meteorite right here that I'm wearing. This is my star metal. What if they all had weapons made out of the star metal and they can use them against the lizard creatures, which are supernatural creatures, and it won't kill them. It'll just make them go poof and banish them back to their own dimension. And that way they can actually be directly using their weapons with no bloodshed, not killing anybody, but you still have this great action stuff. And then it's okay to use weapons against non-living things. So, a rock monster or something like that, you're fine. But this solved my big problem of how to have action in the series and how to let the characters just, directly fight things without killing them, because that was the big no-no. You can't have them killing anything. So that was the solution that I came up with. And that's why all of the different characters have their own unique version of a star metal weapon that they use against the Serpent Men. Because, without that, I don't know how you could possibly have told any kind of a story about Conan, in this ancient world without something like that. So that was...
It's so funny because I remember at the start of the series, his parents get turned into stone. And I was like, well, yeah, that's a lot better than watching his mom's head get cut off. If you could go back and have full creative control over Conan the Adventurer, what would you change about it?
One thing we couldn't do that was really frowned upon in syndication was continuity, continued storylines. I mean, we could do a little bit of it, but it was something that they hated because they were stripping these things. They'd run them like maybe 5 afternoons, Monday to Friday, and that sort of thing that they did in syndication. And so they really didn't like having to worry about story continuity. They wanted to just be able to run them so pretty much any way they wanted to run them. And so the way I tried to get around that is that most of the stories would be standalone stories. But every once in a while, we'd drop in something from the larger story arc, which was trying to save Conan's family and restore them and, overcome the villain finally, that sort of thing. So, and then we did get to do a big 3-part ending to wrap it all up, which was great. But for the most part, they had to be standalone stories. So I think probably the biggest change, I don't know how much else I would change, but to be able to do more continuity, to be able to carry through and give these characters more arc, and have more continuity of story. I think
Out of all the original Robert E. Howard Conan stories, do you have a favorite?
Oh, well, Tower of the Elephant is always at the top. I mean, that's just like the most amazing one. But it's, and Belit, the story of Belit.
Did you ever try to get Belit in the animated series?
No, because we already had one female character, and the Hasbro was focused on the action toys. They were thinking it was a boys' property in their minds. So I don't know if they even did a Jessamine figure, to tell you the truth. I can't recall. I used to have a bunch of the figures, but the Strong Museum of Play in New York has acquired them, so they now actually have my collection of the Conan stuff. But they just thought of it as a boys' property, so they were keeping it pretty clean. And I already had so many characters to work with as it was, that didn't want to throw too many other characters in. The other thing that's kind of fun is that Roy gave me my break writing in comics with a Conan story, and then I was able to go full circle and hire Roy to come and write on the Conan animation series. So it was really great to me to be able to do that, to return that favor. Like, oh yeah, okay, here, come and you could write Conan animation now, and you let me write Conan, and I get to bring you in. At least on the first 13, I had some power to do that. There is something I want to clear up for the record. So the first 13 episodes were done through Sunbow Productions, and that was great. That was wonderful. That was a standard way of working, and everybody got their credit and everything. It was wonderful. Then they decided to do a full syndication run, which meant 65 total episodes, so another 52 episodes. Those 52 episodes were done by a company called Jetlag Productions instead of Sunbow. Jetlag was I don't know how you put a subsidiary, they were owned or whatever, run by a Frenchman named Jean Chalopin, who had a big animation company. And I was required to use only a small subset of writers that they approved. And those writers had to agree that they would not receive a written by credit. So they were going to end up writing the scripts. Jean Chalopin was going to take all of the writing credit. And those writers were only going to be shown as adaptation by, or, English version by, or something like that. And the reason for that is that Chalopin was getting kickbacks from the French government. Because the French government had these programs, sort of like Canada does, where if you produce a program with a certain amount of, say, French content, or Canadian content, for example, they give kickbacks. They give money back for doing this. And so Chalopin's little workaround to get all of these kickbacks was to pretend that he was writing all of these. So I want everybody to know there were American writers writing these scripts, and anybody's name who shows up there, if it just says adaptation by or whatever, they are the writer. Jean Chalopin did not write a single word of any of these. I mean, it really bugged me having to do it at the time. It drove me crazy, but
yeah,
it was the only way to get the series done. I was the sole story editor on all 52 of these episodes, and that meant that I was having to get 3 premises in and approved per week, 3 outlines in and approved per week, and 3 scripts in and approved per week until we were in completion. And I have never worked so hard in my life. That was like superhuman work trying to do that. It was very, very tough.
I looked at season 1 and season 2, and there's like 48 episodes a season. It's crazy. That's more like a 5-season show. Your cat's making a cameo over there.
That's Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
I should just make that a requirement from all guests, that you have to have a cat in the background. It's going to really help boost our subscriber numbers. Oh, I almost forgot. You worked on the Twilight Zone. So cool. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, that was really great. That happened through J. Michael Straczynski, and I had worked with Joe on Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. And so, we are friends, and he knew me from that. So when he started doing this Twilight Zone series, he allowed me to pitch, and I pitched a number of ideas. And I had gotten the inspiration from this idea from an old folk song, amusingly enough. It was an old folk song about a woman lamenting that her cat has become a man. And I don't want to give away anything because it has a great spoiler ending. But that was the inspiration, and Joe loved it. He thought it was great. And then the strike happened, and we were literally right on the cusp of the entire series going down the tubes when they finally resolved the strike. And then I got to write the script. And it was a lot of fun. I loved it. Really loved how it came out. I thought the actors did a great job with it.
You've mentioned that one of the projects you're the most proud of is the comic series Sisterhood of Steel.
So Sisterhood of Steel is my attempt to do what I thought was a more realistic version of how a society of warrior women might have survived and functioned. It's run by the head of it is the Queen of Swords, and then the military head is the Princess of Swords. Then they have a very secretive, shadowy assassination arm headed by the Priestess of Swords. And they basically bring girls to their island and train them up to be warriors for the Sisterhood. And the series that I did focused on one in particular, Baranway, who had been raised by the Sisterhood, and at the age of 16, she was now a cadet, and she was going through the week of trials, and this would determine whether she was going to make it as a full warrior and, set her career into motion, so to speak, within the Sisterhood. And I kept it more down to earth. There's a little bit of mysticism, but there's no sorcery. There's no outright magic. I had been reading a lot of ancient literature, and especially I was reading how Caesar conquered Gaul. I read all of that material, and it inspired me to try to set it into a slightly more realistic and down-to-earth world. The genesis, however, and you should find this interesting, I was frustrated by the way Red Sonja was created for comics. I was frustrated by the fact that she was given a traumatic origin story that then required her to be celibate. And it was just like, why would you do that to this character? I mean, couldn't you do something better? In fact, my Day of the Red Judgment story, to be honest with you, I was trying to sneakily run around that origin story and give her a slightly different sort of an origin, but Roy didn't let me get away with it. But anyway, so my profound frustration with the way the character was being portrayed led me to say, well, how would I do it? What would my character be like? And that was how I ended up actually developing the Sisterhood and coming up with the idea for the Sisterhood. Now these are women who, if they want to go out and screw a guy, they screw a guy, but they also have to be prepared to pay the consequences, and they have a very strict culture and society that they have to operate within, and they're warriors. They are trained as warriors. And I was fortunate enough to sell the series to Epic Comics, which was the creator-owned line that Marvel Comics had for a while, and did the 8 issues through Epic Comics. And then I had a run-in with Archie Goodwin over censorship. There was some censorship. There was one issue where they made us actually change a couple of panels, and they made me change some words, and it was all because the idea of adult-level comics was new, and there were a bunch of distributors in the South who just didn't understand it, who didn't get the fact that these were for 18 and older, and were having all kinds of reactions to it. And so this wave of censorship went through the books at that one point. And unfortunately, I'm a big mouth. I don't keep my mouth shut when it comes to things like that. And I complained rather vociferously about the censorship. And so Archie canceled the book. And then, since I owned it, my then husband, Peter Ledger, and I created the graphic novel and did that through a different, in concert with a different publishing company, Eclipse Comics. And I was able to take the storyline a bit further in that direction. And obviously I had a lot more in mind. And then Peter got killed in a car accident. and I no longer had an artist to work on the series. And I made several attempts to continue the series and to sell it to another publisher, and I just couldn't get anywhere. So I guess the next thing I'll have to do is just write a novelization.
Well, first off, I'm so sorry about Peter. I can't imagine what that must have been like. You guys created something really cool together. And one of my favorite aspects of Sisterhood of Steel is that it takes place in a low fantasy genre, much like Robert E. Howard's Conan series.
Yeah, exactly. There's, like I said, there's a little bit of mysticism in it, in that the Sisterhood has a bramble flower that they make into a really potent kind of a drug that enhances their senses, and that's used primarily by the assassination arm of the Sisterhood. But Bronway ends up getting kind of overdosed on the stuff at one point, and it just like wildly opens up her senses and kind of changes her perceptions.
Have you ever done psychedelics yourself?
Well, I did my share of psychedelics a long time ago.
And did that influence your work?
Well, it definitely does things. I mean, it definitely changes perceptions and can make you think about things differently, for sure. When I was in college, like I said, I did quite a few drugs. I thought that mescaline was really interesting. Most people would take mescaline and get sick and throw up. It's one of the things that mescaline does. I never did. I never got sick like that, but it made me really feel attuned to the natural world. Just very much. I felt very peaceful. I felt very Zen-like, and I just felt like that everything I was seeing and feeling, I just felt so much more attuned to the natural world. And then when I was taking LSD, a lot of it was not great LSD. It was like maybe mixed with stuff that wasn't very good, but once in a while get really pure LSD and it just is transformative. And I would walk around with this enormous smile on my face. I just couldn't stop smiling because just everything felt wonderful to me. And again, I would try to be out in nature when I was doing things like this. And so I was out at this amazing park called Allerton Park, which was not only lovely, but it's the kind of place where you're walking down a wooded path and you come around a corner and there's this utterly bizarre sculpture. They had these most astounding sculptures out at this place. Like the dying centaur was one of them, and one sculpture was this ape carrying a woman out under his arm. And I mean, it was just, you just never knew what was going to pop up. But so it was like a wonderful adventure, but really pure LSD just made me feel wonderfully in tune, again, just like mescaline did, wonderfully in tune, but also just happy. I just felt joy, a great source of joy in everything around me. So I probably did draw some of those experiences, yes.
That's cool. I'm glad that we got to talk, Charles.
Yeah, I'm an old hippie.
So do you have any memories that you've never shared with anybody about your time working with Marvel?
You know, when I wrote Savage Sword, of course, I was writing it on a typewriter. So this was all pre-computer. You know, so it was that physicality of actually having to work on a typewriter, and here's the physical copy of the script, and that physical copy had to be physically taken to somebody. You know, I had to physically take it and deliver it to Roy. You know, which is wildly different than, of course, the way we do things now. Right around that same time period, in addition to finally breaking in as a writer and pursuing writing, I also taught myself to play the metal-strung Celtic harp and became completely entranced with the Celtic harp. And I would go busking, like sit in the park and play it, and I sometimes would play some weddings and events like that. And if you've ever seen a bottle of Guinness that's got a Celtic harp on it, all right, it sits on the lap. It's a lap harp. And mine was a big, beautiful, you know, handmade brass strings. It has a chiming, ringing sound, and it's a very beautiful instrument. And I was really, really into it. And in the course of working with Roy, of course, we became very good friends, and Danette became a friend. And then when they decided to get married, they got married up at the Griffith Observatory. And so I came and played my harp for them at the wedding. So that was my contribution to their wedding, was to sit there and play the harp.
Do you have any memories on the original 1982 movie?
Well, it was great. It was great. I mean, they did such a wonderful job. Elise did a great job with that. And, Schwarzenegger was perfect. He was just the perfect Conan. He really was. And everything in that movie, I thought, came together. And really, I'm not sure about the origin story. I think maybe the origin story was a little kind of iffy, but that's okay. I could live with it. But it was just great. It was just really well done. Everything was so nicely done with that. A little time after that, I actually got to meet Schwarzenegger. It was my late husband, Peter Ledger, was a bodybuilder, and he did some work for this guy named Joe Wiederman, who was like this kingpin in the bodybuilding world in L.A. And so we went to this big party of all these bodybuilders, and I got to meet Schwarzenegger. And it's so funny because it's what they say is true. When you see someone up on a movie screen and they're so gigantic and they're so huge, and when you see them in life, it's like, he's that big? Even though he's a big guy, it's just like somehow you expect a giant or something like that. But anyway, so that was kind of cool getting to meet him there. But yeah, the series, I mean, the movie was I just thought really well done and had some depth to it, which I appreciate.
So we couldn't get through this interview without at least diving a little bit into Gem and the Holograms. What can you tell us?
So at that point, I had been writing G.I. Joe for Sunbow Productions, and I loved writing G.I. Joe because I was very much into hard action stuff, superhero stuff and hard action stuff. I was one of the few women that was writing these hard action adventure kind of shows. And then the Sunbow people got together with me and said, "Oh, well, we have this opportunity for you to do this other show based on this line of dolls, fashion dolls that Hasbro is doing, and they offered it to me as a development deal. It was my very first development deal. I had not had a opportunity to do any development before that, so it was a big deal for me to get it. And I was like thrilled and delighted because this was an amazing opportunity. And at the same time, I was also really disappointed because it was like soft girly stuff. I play soft girly stuff. So I did the usual thing of doing my research, getting whatever information they had to give me, which was very little. They had the holographic computer, of course, and the earrings and the changing the identity, and they had, here's the boyfriend, and this one particular doll is going to be a sister to the main character, and here's the bad girls over here. And all they had were product names for them, but the product names kept changing like every week. Product names, except for I think the only one that didn't change, or the only ones that didn't change, was Pizzazz and Rio, and maybe Synergy. But everybody else, their names all kept changing all the time before they finally settled down. And I had to beg and beg and beg for them to show me some prototypes of the dolls so I could I'm a very visually oriented kind of writer. Obviously, I'm working in all of these visual storytelling forms. So, they finally sent me some crappy Polaroids of what the dolls looked like so I could try to get some sense of what the characters looked like. And then I just had to figure out how to pull it all together and turn it into a series that could potentially last for 65 half hours. And so I just threw together. The other weird thing was it wasn't originally a half-hour series. The way they were first doing it were 15 6-minute segments, and those segments were going to be dropped into a half-hour show, which opened with a segment of boy story stuff, then Gem, and then closing with another segment of another boy story stuff. So it was like 3 different stories, three different product lines, so to speak, into this half hour, and Gem was just slotted into the middle, and they were deeply concerned that the boys would change the dial. We're talking about an era when kids would sit in front of the TV and someone would have to physically go and change the dial to another channel if they didn't wanted to watch something else, of which there were not many options. But they were terrified that the boys would get to the Gem segment and say, "What's this?" and, change the dial. And so those first 15 segments all had these hard action cliffhangers. So I had to have plenty of action and these sort of hard action cliffhangers, try to satisfy this fear that the boys would change the dial. So it was like, okay, we want all this romance and passion and all this kind of stuff, but also all this action. So it was a fun challenge. And what I discovered as time went on, and then all those got repackaged into the first 5 half hours, and it became a half-hour series. So what I discovered is I was actually very good at doing rock soap opera for kids, because that's essentially what Gem was. It was like rock soap opera. And I ended up discovering I was quite good at it and quite enjoyed doing it and had a great time with it. And I still think probably it's what I'm best known for. And the Gem fans are just amazing people. And you talk about how a show has an impact on someone, and that show had an astounding impact on so many people that ended up, going into creative endeavors, whether it was fashion or music or whatever, and people who said that the show helped them survive through times that were just very difficult, particularly gay people. And, it was a show that spoke to people that had secrets and had to keep those secrets and couldn't just be their authentic selves. And so the show really helped them with that. And it had a lot of really tremendous impacts. And what's interesting to me is that it has a new fandom. Has all these young people are finding it and discovering it and enjoying it. And it just keeps going.
You wrote a book, Writing for Comics, Animation, and Games. What advice do you have for aspiring creatives?
Yeah, the book you're talking about is this one. That one, Writing for Animation, Comics, and Games. And this is actually not so much it is an advice book. It's on the nuts and bolts of what you need to know to write in any one of these formats. What are the script format? How do you break in? All the sort of tips and tricks and things, the background that you need to know. And so there is a lot of advice, but there's also a lot of just real nuts and bolts kind of information that will tell you what you need to know about the actual writing in particular for games or for comics, for animation. I did try to give the best advice I could for breaking in, because breaking in now is so radically different than it was for me when I was starting out. But there are some things that never change. And the things that never change is networking. Getting to know people, creating connections, creating cross connections. Those things can pay off in ways you can't possibly imagine. And you have to be good at what you do, obviously, but you need to produce a lot of work and find a way to get it out there, find a way to get people to read it. And that's why making the connections can be so important. But nowadays, you could put things up on Webtoons. You could do your own comic and put it up anywhere on your own website or one of these other websites. I mean, there's just so many other possibilities now that didn't exist back when I was breaking in. So the point is, produce your work, keep producing your work, keep doing it until you're really good at it. Find a way to get it out there in front of people. Just whatever way. You just got to be creative and inventive and find all the, whatever way you can do to do it. And of course, it's tougher for a writer if you're not an artist, because then you have to also, if you want to do comics, we're talking about, you have to connect with an artist somehow and try to work that out. And that makes it a lot more complicated. But you could also do that just by having written prose material. That's really impressive. And again, there are all kinds of outlets now that didn't exist before for you to write continued stories, that can be serialized and that you can then use as a sample and try to get someone's interest. I mean, everybody has a different way of breaking in. So really, you have to be clever and creative and figure out how you're going to break in. But you have to be prepared by having really strong writing samples and strong work and stuff that shows what you can do. And you have to be good at networking with people. And that just means you have to have good social skills, good communication skills. You have to be genuinely interested in other people. You can't just be interested in other people because you want to use them, because they're going to sense that. They're going to figure that out. So it has to be genuine. You have to find a way to genuinely connect with people. But those are probably the most important things that you need to know about trying to break in. Everything else is like happenstance. Just never know what your break might be. But the thing is, you got to be prepared for it. If you get that break, you got to jump at it and really be prepared to live up to whatever the opportunity is.
Are there any projects you're currently working on that you're really excited about?
I'm back to working on what's called the Gemoir, which is I've been working on this for ages now. I'm writing a memoir about Gem and about creating the Gem and the Holograms animation series. So basically, it's going to be about my life and the influences in my life, and about all the various influences that led up to working on Gem, and then background material about working on Gem. So I actually started this back when they first announced the live action movie that you referenced, because I thought, it'd be great if I could, get this memoir out at the same time as this movie. But I was working at Zynga, the game company, the mobile game company, and extremely demanding and long hours. And I got started, I got a few chapters into it, but I simply did not have the time to try to complete something that complex. And then the movie came out and was what it was, and just bombed and was not really Gem, as you pointed out. And so I set it aside, and then we moved to the town of Magalia, which is just north of the town of Paradise, California. And then in 2018, our house burned down in the campfire, and we lost everything. And I lost everything I had, including all my memorabilia, notes, papers, everything gone. All my comics, just everything. Completely just lost everything, burned to the ground. And so it's taken some time to, it took quite a long time before we got into a new home and tried to get past all of that and get our lives back together. And so I am finally back to work on the memoir. I for a while there, I thought, how can I possibly even do this anymore? Because everything's gone. But then I realized that because I had started working on it, I had already done some of the background and research, and I had digitized some key stuff. And so I thought, okay, well, a lot of it's lost, but I think I have enough so that I can actually still do this. So I decided to go ahead and start working on it. After which I wanted to really get into writing some novels, because the one thing I have not done in my entire career is to write a novel. I've written quite a number of nonfiction books, but I have yet to actually write a novel, and that's something I definitely want to get done someday soon.
Oh, maybe a Sisterhood of Steel novel. That'd be pretty cool.
I started, I started a Sisterhood of Steel novel. I started a novelization of the series. And I had like three chapters and a detailed outline and all of this stuff. And I had a very good New York agent that loved it and wanted to represent it. And so he took it out and tried to sell it. But they wanted to see a completed book. And I just never, it was like everything else in my life took over. All the other writing and development and work I was doing, whether it was games or animation or TV or whatever it was, just took over, and I never got back to it. But yes, I would still like to go and do that.
Well, I'm really looking forward to reading those books. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
All righty, thanks.
That was pretty fun. So fun that you're going to like and subscribe and comment and let us know what you want to see on the show. And by what, I mean human beings. That's the only thing we have within our wheelhouse at the moment, particularly the ones that are involved with Conan the Barbarian in any shape or form. That could have been phrased better. Guys, like, subscribe, and conquer. I'm back for more next time.